For those of you who may not know, my name is Robert Pleasant. I am the Associate Director of Student Services for the Southern Campus. First, I want to welcome you all to the session. I hope everyone is safe and warm during this crazy weather. And if you're anything like me, you're praying for spring. You can't wait till spring gets here. So it looks beautiful right now, but I'm ready for spring. What we'd like to do today, I want to thank Christy Perez and her team for agreeing to facilitate this conversation. One of the things that we try to do on the Southern Campus as often as possible, we want to give our faculty and staff an opportunity to meet Dr. McKenzie, who is our coordinator on our campus, but also to ask questions and get any kind of updates regarding accessibility services. And so with so many of our students that are enrolling in courses across our campuses, we thought that this would be a great opportunity to meet all the coordinators from each campus and also to get any kind of updates in regard to policies, procedures, laws, whatever it may be. So I want to thank Christy and her team for agreeing to facilitate this conversation. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this session. We have a number of folks who could not be here because they're having issues with the snow and weather-related issues. We want to record it for them. And also, if you have questions, feel free to use the chat, okay? At this time, Christy, I'm going to turn it over to you and your team, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Robert. I'm going to try to share my screen here while I talk, so I apologize if I sound a little distracting. So my name is Christy Perez. I'm the Director for Student Accessibility, and our office, we work across all regional campuses as well as the Athens campus. And so, like Robert said, we just thought it would be really helpful for us to all get together so that you can meet all of our coordinators, put faces with names, as I know a lot of our communication, especially nowadays, has been through email instead of meeting face-to-face. But also because a lot of our students relocate across campuses or take even if they're located on one campus, they might take a class or two from another campus. So it's just, I think it's helpful to kind of know who we are, see who you might be communicating with at some point, and just know that we're here to help and answer questions as you have them. So I'm going to ask our staff to introduce themselves before we get started. But really, we just have kind of an overview of some laws, some things that we do within our office, services that we provide, some helpful tips, and but we really want to make sure that we have some time for you all to ask questions if you have them. So we're gonna, I guess, jump right on in here. Nina, if you want to start by introducing yourself, and then we'll kind of have everyone go from there.
My name is Nina Henderson, and I am the coordinator that is responsible for the Zanesville, the Eastern, and the Lancaster campuses.
Heidi, do you want to go next?
My name is Heidi Cottrell, and I'm the accessibility coordinator responsible for the Chillicothe, and I also have a caseload in Athens.
Chris?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Chris Linscott. I'm an accessibility coordinator on the Athens campus.
Christy?
Hi, I'm Christy Cosma, and I am also an accessibility coordinator on the Athens campus.
And Teresa? Did we lose Teresa?
I was muted. Okay, I'm Dr. Teresa McKenzie, and I'm the coordinator for the Southern Campus and also for the Ohio Online students, formerly known as e-learning students.
So that is our team, and as I had mentioned, some of our objectives for today is just to do a really brief overview of the law as it pertains to disability in what we do, for you all to understand what our processes are for determining accommodations, clarify the role of not just our office, but also your role as faculty and staff and the role that students have in our process. And then identify ways to appropriately support students and refer them if you're aware that they have a disability or suspect such. I did want to make sure to share is the legal definition for disability, because I think this is much broader than what a lot of people think of when they think of the word disability. But legally, the definition is a physical or a mental condition that substantially limits a person's major life activity. So this can be things like seeing, hearing, learning, concentrating, walking, sitting, reaching, social interactions. The list goes on and on. But it's not really, I guess a lot of people kind of think of a more narrow definition where they think of things that are more visible disabilities or apparent disabilities that you can see that somebody experiences. But the reality is the majority of our students have what's called invisible disabilities that you can't see or can't observe just by interacting with them. So things like learning disabilities, ADHD, a lot of psychological conditions, autism spectrum disorder. Those are all things that we can't automatically just know that somebody has by a general interaction. And so I wanted to make sure that you know that the majority of students that we work with do fall under that invisible disability category. Although we do have plenty of students that also have, visual impairments, are deaf or hard of hearing, mobility limitations, things that you can observe a little bit more easily as well. The laws that impact higher education are a little bit different than what you see in the K-12 system, which is what a lot of our students are used to when they come to Ohio University. We operate under the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So while some of these laws do pertain to K-12 as well, there are also additional laws that do not pertain to higher education. And those laws focus a lot more on success. In the K-12 system, there's a much bigger focus on helping students succeed, making sure that they progress from one grade to the next, one level to the next, where at the higher ed level, we're focused much more on access and making sure that students have an equal opportunity to succeed or fail. And that's something that I think is really important to remember. We're not necessarily trying to help students succeed, although accommodations do help students succeed a lot of times. But accommodations don't guarantee that a student is going to be successful. They still have to meet the same expectations and standards of any student. But these laws are intended to protect people who have historically been excluded. It prohibits discrimination and requires that we provide reasonable accommodations. And then where we really come in is that it does require institutions to develop policies that address compliance issues and have a central point for accommodation requests to go through. And so that's where our office comes into play.
All right, I'm going to talk about our office. I'm sorry, Christy, go ahead.
No, you're good.
Okay, all right. Our office is a central point for students to self-identify and then go online and do the process of applying for accommodations. We try to get the word out in various ways that we are available. Instructors have a little bit of information about the coordinators, our website, some of the information needed to apply for services. We get referrals from instructors, a lot of self-referrals. Sometimes parents will even contact us or other people. Our job is to review these applications and the documentation and determine what's reasonable. As Christy mentioned, there is a difference between what is occurring at the public school level and also at the college level, because our job is to provide access. We do not guarantee success. Students are required to meet the same standards for passing a class as other students. So part of that involves determining what are appropriate and reasonable accommodations for a student. We advise faculty and staff, and sometimes students and parents. We educate them about how to implement an accommodation, what is reasonable in a certain situation, and sometimes what is reasonable in one class may not be reasonable in another class. So we work closely with all of these people regarding the accommodations. And the other thing that we do is we help connect students with support, and we do this in a variety of ways. We can make referrals to counseling services. There's the Counseling and Psychological Services office in Athens. We can sometimes help with some referral for testing. For example, if a student has a learning disability or something that maybe they cannot be seen or are not being treated by their medical practitioner, they maybe want to pursue it further with the Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, OOD. So we might give them contact information, try here, or how far are you from Athens? Would you be willing to drive there and have psychological testing done? Another one of the resources that we have been using is online tutoring, or the Academic Achievement Center. They have remote peer tutoring. They talk about on their website, they've got a lot of good information on their website, the supplemental instruction where a student who has taken the class, passed it successfully, will have free weekly review of courses that are typically difficult for students. It might be chemistry, math, accounting, those kinds of courses. You can see all of that online. There's a student writing center, the online learning navigation, which is something that I just found out about fairly recently. And it's a very neat tool for students who are struggling in trying to figure out how to navigate this online system. Some of them are not familiar with Blackboard, or maybe they don't know how to use Teams or any of these other things. So they can get support with a peer who will help them prioritize their tasks, do some time management things. They can show them how to navigate Blackboard. So that's been a good resource for some students. Each of the regional campuses also has a link there as well, where they can see what's available locally for them. And then I guess I'm ready, for the next slide. Student Accessibility Services, the central office is located in Baker Center in 348. Each of us who cover the regional campuses have our own office on each campus. As I said, I cover the Eastern campus, the Zanesville campus, and we'll be covering the Lancaster campus as well. I'll have an office at each one, and that does not mean a student can only coordinate a meeting with me or somehow connect with me when I'm on that campus. I tell students the easiest way to get a hold of me is through email, and we are able to respond. Something else to know, we discuss with the regional students often, do you intend to transfer to Athens? Because I let them know we're all one office, it's the same process, and when they're ready to relocate to Athens, we can just transfer them to another coordinator. We facilitate that introduction, and then students basically just pick up and go on from there. We have a website that is, I think, has a tremendous amount of good information on there. It's got links to the online applications or links for submitting requests for like a note taker. And we have some very good videos on there that will go through the process of how to connect with these various applications. That's that.
Faculty's role at Ohio University. Faculty members serve as a gateway for accommodations. They receive requests from students, and the form of an accommodation letter is the most appropriate way to receive a request for accommodations. And then when the faculty member receives that accommodation letter, then they start making arrangements with the student to accommodate the student, whether it's testing in the testing center, allowing for extra time, working with our office to, set up captioning, whatever it might be. And anytime that a faculty member has a concern, the faculty member can find our contact information and that student specific accessibility coordinator at the bottom of the accommodation letter, and it'll have our email address and a phone number that we can be reached. We always encourage faculty that if they don't know what an accommodation is that is listed on the accommodation letter, to contact us so that we can at least let them know, because one of the worst things could happen that you don't provide that accommodation just because you don't know what it is. So always reach out to us, especially if you feel that an accommodation may not necessarily be appropriate for your class. It's always best to have that conversation with us first, so that we can have a conversation to decide what could be done or if we need to maybe tweak an accommodation. And it's very important that the student's confidentiality is also maintained. So if you happen to write on your attendance sheet that the student uses accommodations, it wouldn't be appropriate to pass that attendance sheet around to the class for them to check off their name that they're present. Just keeping that confidentiality intact for that student. A lot of our students that register with our office do not want other students to know that they have accommodations. They want to be treated just like any other student. So that's important. And the faculty impact. The faculty impact on a student with a disability is crucial. Reasons why students leave a university often can result in inconsistent accommodations, not being provided the accommodations that they are approved for, or not having a conversation with the student when a certain accommodation isn't appropriate for a class. And then lack of faculty awareness of disability and disability resources. Just receiving the letter and then, not having a conversation with the student, or if a student is reaching out to them saying, hey, I'm struggling, not connecting them with their proper resources to help them, whether it's connecting them back to our office or connecting them with tutoring services. And then also the negative attitudes or perceptions of faculty and instructors. You are oftentimes, as a faculty member, one of the first people that these students are having to talk to about their accommodations, and especially for a freshman who's never had to express, hey, I have accommodations and this is what they are. Your first impression of their accommodation letter can really mean a lot to that student, how you interact with them, how you respond to that letter. So that can be important. And the student role. The student must self-identify to SAS as a student with a disability, as Nina mentioned in a previous slide. They must participate in the SAS interactive process to determine accommodations. So our online application, providing documentation, and then meeting with us in an intake meeting to determine what is a reasonable accommodation. They also are required to provide official notification to the faculty member within a timely manner, so that accommodation letter, providing them in a time that allows the faculty member time to provide that accommodation. And then engage with the faculty to develop a plan for implementation. So sending them sending the professor their accommodation letter and saying, hey, can we schedule a time to talk about these accommodations?
Hi, this is Chris speaking now. I also just want to mention, if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to post them in the chat, and we'll be happy to try to address them at the end. So in determining reasonable accommodations, there's a number of things that we need to take into account. You've heard this term reasonable a number of times. You're going to hear it a number of times again. It can be a little misleading because we use the word reasonable all the time, but in this case, it's actually a technical term defined by the ADA in Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And so I'll talk about that a bit more in just a moment. But really what we're attempting to do is understand how a person's condition impacts them and the barriers. So in determining reasonable accommodations, we're attempting to make sure we understand the functional limitations that create barriers, and thus approve accommodations that are intended to remove those barriers. As Heidi mentioned, they're determined during the intake meeting between the accessibility coordinator and the student. So a student will have provided us documentation that substantiates their condition and impacts. And so based on that, we're really looking to understand their narrative, so how their condition affects them. And then we're approving accommodations with a generalized understanding of how it may impact the student in most courses. So accommodations are determined on an individual basis. It's not one size fits all. Two people could have the same diagnosis and be affected very differently and therefore have very different accommodations. So we're not making generalizations based on a particular diagnosis or the presence of a particular condition. We're really attempting to understand how that person is impacted and in turn how it can be accommodated. So what is a reasonable accommodation? It's an alteration to remove a barrier to full participation in programs or services. So that's obviously very broad. In actuality, anyone can request anything at any time as an accommodation, and that may sound extremely broad, but what a person may not know what the barrier they're facing might be until they experience it. So whether it's an adjustment to a program or service, a physical access barrier, or an academic accommodation, a student or faculty or staff member for that matter may request an adjustment to that program or service, and we will in turn attempt to determine how to create access and whether or not it is reasonable. So institutions by law need to have a clear process to receive and respond to requests. You've heard a little bit about that. So SAS is the site of contact for that. So a student would submit an application and documentation. We would review it, and then we would meet with that student, as I described earlier, to better understand how they're being impacted. So some of the limitations to what an accommodation can do, it can't create an undue burden to the institution. What may seem like an undue burden to one of us may not seem that way to the Office of Civil Rights. So cost can be substantial in certain instances, but in reality, most accommodations are not expensive to implement. So we can't create an undue burden to the institution. We can't create a direct threat to the safety of the student or others. And we can't create what would be considered a fundamental alteration to the nature of our programs or services. So obviously that's pretty loaded, but if you ever have a question specifically about those, let us know and we'll be happy to make a determination.
And so moving on from the determining of accommodations, the next part would be for instructor notification. So as Heidi had mentioned, the student would request and receive the letter. We would write the letter, the official accommodation letter, and then the student would provide that to their instructors. At that point, the student and faculty would want to discuss how to implement the accommodations. It might be that you have students with testing accommodations where they would have additional time on an exam or need a reduced distraction location separate from the classroom to take their exams. And that would be certainly an open conversation that you could have with the student. We encourage our students to discuss this when they do provide their letter with you. And a common theme you've noticed already, probably on some of these slides, is that faculty are encouraged to contact the coordinators for assistance or questions regarding any of the accommodations or how to implement those or ideas on what's worked in the past as far as implementation. So you could arrange to meet with the student or, through email, however, to discuss their needs. You can make plans for the space or additional time in advance of test day, obviously, because we don't want you to be in the position of scrambling, worrying about meeting the students' accommodations. And we do put that responsibility on the student also, is that they need to work it out with you before test time. Again, contact the coordinator if you have any questions about specific accommodations and how to implement those. We do get a lot of questions from instructors and faculty all the time, so we're used to that. And again, another common point we keep making is to keep the information confidential. If you do contact us, we will discuss the accommodations and implementing them. We don't share, why a student would be registered with us, any diagnosis or disability label or anything such as that. But we will be happy to discuss how to implement those accommodations if you're not sure.
Hi, I'm going to talk about the accommodation process. The accommodation process is an interactive process. And initially, this process starts with just the accessibility coordinator, one of us, and the student. The reason it starts this way is because the accessibility coordinators, we are trained to understand what accommodations are appropriate and most likely to address functional impairments caused by the disabling condition. The student's role in this interactive process is that they understand their own limitations. They know how the disability impacts them in a learning classroom. They know how it impacts their ability to focus, study. So they bring that knowledge. And then it's a flexibility is essential to meeting the needs of the student and his or her classmates and the instructor. The instructor's piece in this comes in when there are concerns or questions about the accommodations, or there is a lack of understanding of the nature of the accommodation. Heidi mentioned earlier, and I think Christy and even Chris mentioned the talking to the coordinators. We encourage faculty to reach out to us because, again, if you don't understand it or it doesn't make sense to you or you don't know how it could be implemented in your classroom, we want to have a conversation before you just decide not to implement it. Because what we're working with is that these are things that are required once we do our part and have the initial meetings and complete the registration process. Registration, again, is an interactive process. While we might have some idea, the student has to give their input into their limitations. And then as a unit, collective unit, we make a decision on those accommodations. And again, we make sure they're reasonable for the academic environment. So again, we encourage instructors to be part of this, especially if there are issues or concerns, and especially with the flexibility accommodation that some of you may have already seen. And we send information, but we encourage you to have those conversations with us. Next. Here are a few accessibility tips. Make sure you include an accessibility statement on your syllabus. And do not include a deadline. While we've heard the words timeliness, you've heard reasonable time, you've heard us talk about that. We are not saying that students cannot get accommodations throughout the semester. The reality is that our students, even though we encourage them to turn in their letters to their instructors at the beginning of the semester to get the most benefit from their accommodations throughout the whole semester, some students will wait. We don't want them to wait, but they will wait. So students can turn in their accommodation letter to their instructor at any point in the semester. Again, we don't want them to do that, but they can. What you need to remember is that these accommodations are not retroactive. So the day they give it to you is the day that those accommodations go into place. Also, make sure you talk to your student. Invite your students whenever you let them know that there is something that they can do in terms of if they have a disability that impacts them. Invite them to come and speak to you privately about it. Also, another thing that you can do to help your students is if you have a textbook or required readings, make sure that information is available in advance for your students. For example, in course offerings, if you have a textbook, include that early enough so that students who have accommodations that use text-to-speech software and get their books in alternate format have an opportunity to get those books or request those books in the alternate format from us. And then when you pick videos, look for videos that have captioning. Because even though you may have a student who has a hearing impairment, that's not the only students who benefit from having captioning. Students who are auditory learners but also need the visual piece, the words scroll across the screen, benefit from having captioning. And then finally, clearly outline the expectations of your course. Include deadlines for assignments. Make everything clear and not vague. As Heidi pointed out, when we have freshman students, they are learning our process. And if they're learning our process and learning to navigate their disability by being responsible for ensuring they get their accommodations, vagueness is not a friend to them. They need to have some clarity. So make sure all your deadlines are outlined in your syllabus or on your Blackboard, so that students have a clear understanding of what your expectations are for your course.
I would like to talk just a little further about what Teresa was saying regarding students who would disclose to you that they have a disability. As you can see, there are some things on this PowerPoint to do and don't do. If a student discloses that I have a disability, they have a disability, ask if they're registered with our office. If they are not registered, you might point them to the information that is on our website or included in your syllabus statement. You could offer to connect them to us. Sometimes instructors will do that, and then we can take it from there. We've made the introduction, we can send the student information. If they are registered with our office, ask for the accommodation letter. This is the best thing for the student and the other students in the class. If a student is requesting to use accommodations, we want to be sure that the correct accommodations are being implemented and provide the opportunity for you or the student to contact us if you have any questions. If a student does disclose this, it is important to speak to them privately about this and how these accommodations might be implemented in their class. There are accommodations, for example, I'll use maybe somebody who has has dyslexia or a social phobia or something. If they're in a public speaking class, I've had some students who found it very difficult to get up and speak in front of the class. And being able to talk to the instructor about this requirement for the course, I've been very impressed with some of the ways we have found to meet that course requirement and do it in a manner that was meeting the same requirement, but yes, also didn't create a barrier for the student in the process. So again, contact the coordinator. Don't ask students for specific information about their disability, or if something comes up, ask them for detailed information from their medical provider. If you have any concerns about the as I've mentioned before, about the implementation of the accommodation, get in touch with us rather than just not do it at all. If we have evaluated the information that a student has provided in their self-report and also in their documentation, and we have determined what is reasonable, so it can create a slippery slope sometimes if instructors provide accommodations that have not been approved by our office. And again, as we've said, the students need to meet the same expectations in your course as anyone else. And so we are working collectively to figure out how to remove any barriers that may exist to meeting those expectations. And lastly, don't discuss the student's disability with others. If anyone has any questions, you can refer them to our office.
I am going to talk about more things that you should do and don't do with students. If you suspect a student has a disability, but they have disclosed it. Am I echoing?
A little bit.
Okay. So if you suspect the student has a disability, but they have not disclosed it to you, send the student an email asking to meet with them to discuss their class performance. You're not going to talk to them about a disability. You're going to talk about class performance. Next, you're going to focus on your observations. Again, I'm echoing. Observations of the student's performance that are concerning, not your suspect that they might have a disability, but their performance and what you observed. Next, if you have the student, if asked the student is currently registered to receive assistance. If they have received assistance for struggles in the past, and they aren't receiving them currently, refer them to us. Send them to Student Accessibility Services. Encourage them to reach out to us. And each of you should have our information that you include in your syllabus, so you can give them that access to the information. Next, ask if the student is interested in learning more about resources and suggest accessibility services, SAS, in conjunction with other campus resources like tutoring, supplemental instruction, the learning navigators. Next, these are things not to do. You cannot ask a student if they have a disability. You cannot assume they have a disability or diagnose them. And then you cannot suggest that they will be eligible for specific accommodations through SAS. Again, that's an interactive process that occurs between the student and the coordinator.
Next slide. I'm sorry, my screen hasn't refreshed. Is the next slide referring students up? Oh, there we go. Thank you. So if a student expresses interest to you in learning more about SAS, you can offer to walk them over to our office once we are reopened, or you can just send an email to connect them to the appropriate accessibility coordinator. Something simple works very well. I was speaking with Chris. They talked about accommodations. Here's an email that Chris has copied to make sure you two are connected, and then we can take it from there. You're welcome to follow up with them to see if they need assistance accessing any other resources. Some of those were mentioned earlier. Nina spoke to a number of them, but if a student mentions specifically that they're in need of tutoring, obviously you would refer them to the options that you're aware of. Same thing with any other office or opportunity on campus that you're aware of. If they choose not to follow through in registering with SAS, respect that. This can be difficult, particularly if a student has disclosed to you that they struggle in particular areas, they've disclosed that it's a result of their disability, and they choose not to use accommodations or register with our office. That can be tricky, but to respect them as a human being and as an individual, it's essential to give them that opportunity. And we meet a lot of students. In fact, I often talk with students about the fact that all college students are going through a change of identity, right? They're learning about what makes them successful, what their challenges are. It's no different for a student with a disability, except that they may have some additional variables to consider. And so if a student chooses not to register with SAS, not to use accommodations, that's their right. And if there are repercussions or consequences, experiencing that is part of a decision that they made. So a student can always revisit our office. They can always register at a later date, but we can't compel them to, nor can we compel them to use accommodations for which they've been approved. And also essential, please remember to keep information about a student's disability confidential, whether it's simply the accommodations you've learned about through a semester request that the student provided, or if they've disclosed much more to you about their condition and impacts. Make sure to keep that information to yourself. Don't share it with other faculty, certainly not with other students.
All right, I apologize. I muted myself and then lost my mute button since I was presenting. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about is both your right as a faculty or instructor, as well as students' rights. So students and instructors have the right to appeal any decision that is made by our office. What we do recommend is I'll start with students. If a student feels like they are not being accommodated appropriately, or if they disagree with the decision that was made by their coordinator, the first step would be for them to talk with their accessibility coordinator to better understand what the situation is, maybe why their request for accommodations was not approved. The accessibility coordinator should be able to explain further why that decision was made. But if the student still disagrees with that, they are welcome to appeal that to me. At that point, I would review the decision that was made, any information that was gathered to help lead to that decision. So if a student submitted documentation, conversations that are coordinators would have had with the student during their intake interview. I would review all of that information and either provide further clarification as to why that decision was made, or if that decision is overturned, I would explain both to the student and to the coordinator why that decision was changed. I am the final decision maker for student accessibility services. However, if a student disagrees with my determination, they are welcome to appeal that to our ADA 504 coordinator for a final determination, which is then appealable to the provost. This process is pretty similar for faculty and instructors as well. So if you were to receive a letter from a student with an accommodation that you don't think is applicable to your course or don't think is reasonable given the nature of your course or the objectives of your course, the first step would be to go back to talk with the accessibility coordinator. I know a number of our staff had mentioned that throughout this presentation, that if you have questions, to talk with them, and that is really important. It not only is important to make sure that we're accommodating the student, but it's also important because it protects you as an instructor to make sure that you're not making those determinations without first having that conversation with us. You know, we are definitely more aware of the laws surrounding disability impacts and accommodations that are reasonable and may not be reasonable. So it is really important that we have those conversations if you do determine or believe that an accommodation isn't appropriate in your class. And just like students, if you disagree with what an accessibility coordinator determines, you can appeal that to me. And if you disagree with something that I make a decision on, you can appeal that to our ADA 504 coordinator. This process is not a secret. It is on our website. I believe we have a link. I might be mistaken on that, but I believe we have a link to it in our faculty notification letters. We provide this information to students when they register with our office. So it's something that we want to make sure that both students and faculty have the knowledge of what their rights are, both as a student with a disability and then also what faculty rights are in maintaining the integrity of their courses. So please, you know, this process exists for a reason, and we really do encourage you to work through that if you have questions or concerns. You know, there may be some times where you don't disagree with everything that we say or do, and that's okay. Just, you know, I hope that what you are seeing from this, though, is that we really have not just the student's best interest in mind, but we're really trying to help the institution as a whole stay in compliance with the law. So while it does come from a good place, you know, these are rights that students have, and we want to make sure that they're getting those. We're also trying to protect you as an instructor and the university as a whole, and making sure that we are maintaining our compliance and our responsibilities with these laws. So that is all of the information that we have to share. I know that was a really quick overview and had quite a bit of information in the time that we shared that. But I did want to make sure that we had time to address any questions that you all may have. On this last slide here, I did just make sure to provide all of our contact information. If you have questions or needed to follow up with any of us individually, please feel free to reach out to us by email. Our phone number, our general phone number, I should have listed here as well, but it is on our website, and we all have, the regional campuses all have individual phone numbers as well. So please, we encourage you to reach out. We love to engage in communication with you all and to help facilitate solutions.
Christy, we have a few questions.
Let me see if I can X out of here. I can't see them.
I can read them if you want. The first one.
Oh yeah, go ahead if you don't mind.
Okay, the first question is, if the student has not used the services during the semester but wants to use their accommodations for their final exam, is this approved?
Yeah, so I don't remember who exactly had discussed that, but students can make a request at any point in the semester. Part of it is going to depend on when they actually make that request. So if the final exam is the same day that they're asking for an accommodation, technically their accommodation is approved, but if it was not given to you in a timely manner to make appropriate arrangements, you would not be obligated to provide those accommodations at that point. If they're providing notification to you a week before the final exam, then yes, that would probably be adequate timing to make arrangements for extended time or reduced distraction location, which are our most common accommodations. But again, if you have any questions, I definitely encourage you to reach out to the student's coordinator just to make sure that, that it's not something that we can work out given the time constraints available.
Okay, next question is, does your office coordinate needs beyond the classroom, for example, dining or housing?
We do. So dining and housing does pertain more to the Athens campus, but we do work very closely with housing, and our colleagues in housing also help us facilitate needs surrounding dining accommodations as well. Dining accommodations we don't see as much of just because there are a lot of systems within culinary services that can accommodate students without going through our office. For example, they do have a special diets program where they can create meals that students may need for specific dietary restrictions, whether it's based on preference, medical conditions, or disabilities. And so oftentimes we'll refer students to go through their process first, but of course, if they are not able to meet their needs through their normal processes, we would review any accommodation requests for dining. Housing is very similar in that there are some things that they can make arrangements for students on their own, but we do have students that come through our office if they request accommodations like maybe a single room, or if they need an ADA compliant residence room where they have like a private shower that has handrails, or if they need a placement that is accessible by wheelchair, we may ask for like a first floor placement or a building with an elevator. So we do coordinate with housing and dining pretty closely.
And we have a comment. It says, regarding course materials, the libraries have service options for students with disabilities as well, and there's a link. If you want to talk about accessible library resources, feel free to reach out to me. And this is from C. Gooder. Or get in touch with your subject area librarian for purchasing options. And then there's another question. Do you provide services for student employment?
We do. So what we've talked about today is mostly in regard to the student experience as far as their academic experience, but just like we do expand into housing and dining options, we do coordinate accommodations for employees in general. So we are part of a greater office called the Office for University Accessibility. And so we do have an employment element within that as well. Chris Linscott is actually going to be working with employees in the future. As of right now, that does still fall under our ADA 504 coordinator's responsibilities. Her name is Dr. Carrie Bush. So if you are an employee that needs accommodations, please feel free to reach out to her, or you can always reach out to our office too, and we can connect you with the appropriate person. But yeah, that includes professional staff as well as student employees that may need accommodations.
I don't see any more questions. Oh, there's one more.
I have a question. Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Mhm.
I have I apologize. My internet keeps going out, and I've been out and in of the meeting because of this. Though you may have covered this, but I didn't hear it. Does every student that registers with you have an accessibility coordinator assigned to them?
Yes, so they are assigned an accessibility coordinator as soon as they initiate the registration process. So even before they're fully registered, they will be assigned a coordinator. Usually it's based on what campus that they are enrolled on. But with Athens, because we do have a larger student population in Athens, we base that on their last name. So they should all have an accessibility coordinator. If they're ever unsure of who that is, they can reach out to our general email, which is just disabilities@ohio.edu, and we can help connect them to the appropriate person from there.
Okay, thank you. Now, my last question is, if a student comes to us requesting accommodation and they are not registered with you, and they refuse to register with you, are we obligated to fulfill that? I think you said no. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so if they do not register with our office and they cannot provide you with some official record of accommodations from our office, you are not obligated to provide any accommodations. I would recommend, if that happens, I would recommend letting the student know that in order to provide accommodations, that you need some kind of official record from our office. They do have the choice whether or not to follow through on that. But they can't have it both ways. So if they choose not to follow through on that, that does not obligate you to provide accommodations. So they do have to.
Okay, thank you. This was very informative. For some reason, I'm unable to join the chat. That's the reason I was asking just wanted to let you know I can't type in the chat for some reason. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I do see that there was a follow-up question to the employment about, do student accommodations follow them to student employment? This is not, I would say probably not true most of the time. While a student might be eligible for accommodations in their employment, if they're eligible for academic accommodations, a lot of times those are going to look very different. So for example, a student may have extended time for testing. In their employment situation, they might not have tests. They probably won't have exams or anything like that, but they might have other tasks or responsibilities that they need extended time for. So they don't often translate exactly into an employment situation, which is why we do have someone that works with employment specifically rather than having students or employees in general go to multiple people for that.
I would just add that it's not automatic. So a person can use accommodations in employment and not in an academic setting. The reverse is also true. A student can use accommodations in the academic setting and not request them for employment. So it's not automatic, but it is easier, you know, for a student to get connected to one or the other if they're already receiving accommodations, but it's not automatic. They would need to request workplace accommodations in addition to academic accommodations.
And I see a question about student confidentiality, saying that there's been some situations where a student with an accommodation was identified and shared by a coordinator, but the name of the student was not shared with the instructor of record. Is this common? So usually for the majority of accommodations, they don't need to be implemented until a student discloses that themselves to the instructor of record. There are some exceptions where, for example, I'll use captioning or sign language interpreting. Those are accommodations that a lot of times we do need to coordinate. We need more lead time to coordinate those accommodations. And so while the student may not provide the letter of notification until they enroll in the course, our office might reach out on their behalf prior to the semester starting to get some information to start that coordination. Because we do, so the part of the reason that we don't disclose the student's name is because we do want to respect their autonomy and their right to disclose at their discretion. But we know, especially with students that may need those caption materials, we know that that is something that they're going to need pretty consistently throughout all of their courses. And as Teresa mentioned, it's something that benefits students more broadly than just those who need it because they may be deaf or hard of hearing. There might be some other accommodations occasionally where we may reach out in advance, but I think with the captioning and interpreting needs, those tend to be the ones that we reach out in advance most frequently. I know we have about 5 minutes left. I don't know if anyone has any other questions. You can feel free to leave them in the chat, or please feel free to unmute yourself as well if that's easier for you.
So Christy, I do have a question. With students enrolling at multiple campuses, I've had this, I have a number of faculty who've contacted me about this. If a student is from Lancaster taking a Southern class, and the students spoken to the faculty member, they need accommodations. The faculty member is right in to refer that student to the coordinator at Lancaster, correct?
Yeah, so if the student is already registered with our office, they'll have a letter that has who their coordinator is. But if they're not registered, if they know that the student is from another campus, they can refer them to that coordinator directly. But if not, because I would imagine that there may be some times where you have a student in your class that you don't know is typically enrolled on another campus, you can always refer them to the coordinator for your specific campus, and we can get them connected if they need to be connected to someone different. But we do all work very closely. I mean, we're all spread out in different physical locations, but we're in constant communication with each other, and it's not unheard of to get somebody connected to the wrong person at first, and then get them reconnected. So please don't hesitate to reach out, or even if you're not sure if it's the right person, feel free to still connect them, and we can redirect them if necessary.
Hi there. My name is Lila Thacker, and I work with the undergraduate admissions office at the Athens campus. And I just was curious, I coordinate, and it's my responsibility to help anybody that contacts us for any type of accommodations for our campus visits, any individual appointments in our office, and all of our larger visitation programs. And I was just curious, do you guys do anything at the regional campuses for prospective students?
I can speak for the Southern campus. I attend all orientations and also CC Plus orientations, and I talk about accessibility services. I give them information about what we do, why we do it, how we do it, and then I give them information to start the process and documentation that they need. And I give a better understanding of possible disabilities that might be impacted so that they have a greater understanding instead of thinking of learning disabilities or ADHD.
Okay.
And I think Heidi and maybe Nina also does the same.
Okay. I know over the past, I've been there for quite some time. And so I work really, really close with Carrie Bush whenever she's has been my mentor and helped me through the years, 24 years of working with prospective students. But just if you ever have a student or prospective knowing they're coming to the campus, they can register for any of our programs. I don't know how it's going right now. We've just started up the beginning of spring semester trying to offer on campus individual appointments. We're hoping soon to go to a little bit larger group visits. But I'm the contact person for our office if anybody would want to come. And we offer a variety of accommodations, wheelchair requests. We have them in Baker Center where most of our information sessions are held. We always keep a couple when our staff is in the office. We have wheelchairs in Chubb Hall. For the larger programs, when I need more wheelchairs, I contact Preston with Student Accessibility Services Office, or I use Baker Center or Mamad's wheelchairs. We do private tours, we do van tours, we do captioning services, sign interpreting with a Deaf Services Center in Worthington. So we make a lot of accommodations for any prospective students and their families when they come to campus. I was just curious what you guys did, so.
Yeah, and I think there are some differences on each campus slightly. But yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Lila. I know that we've worked with you for quite some time, and you've been really helpful. And that's part of what I love about, the work that we do. Like, I had mentioned at some point here that this is really an institutional effort. It's not, while we're the central point for students that are enrolled in the university, it's not something that's just SAS's job. It's something that's really an institutional effort. And so just the fact that you all are here and sharing and willing to learn, I think says a lot about your commitment to inclusion, and specifically for the students with disabilities. And so I just really appreciate all of you being here and sharing and learning. And and I hope that we can continue this collaboration moving forward.
Thank you.
All right. We're at 1 o'clock. So Christy, thank you and everyone for a great job. I think this was really informative, and I hope that we can continue this in the semesters to come. So thank you all. Thank everyone for attending.